Okay, so we are live, and I'm starting the session. Greetings and a warm welcome to everyone. I am Dibita, the assigned moderator from DentalNet. It is my proud privilege to extend a heartfelt welcome to all the delegates joining us from the across country. We are indeed fortunate to have the valuable support of esteemed doctors, and I express my gratitude to each one of you for dedicating your time to be with us today. DentalNet is a dedicated all-in-one medical content platform designed exclusively for dental professionals. Our mission is to empower dentists, hygienists, dental specialists, and students with cutting-edge evidence-based knowledge to elevate patient care and foster ongoing professional growth. At DentalNet, we bring together a nationwide network of dental experts to share their knowledge, clinical experience, and practical wisdom. And the topic of today's session is fundamentals of tooth preparation. For this, I would like to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Deepika Ma'am. Dr. Deepika Ma'am is a highly accomplished maxillofacial prosthodontist with extensive expertise in restoring oral function, aesthetics, and quality of life for patients with complex maxillofacial conditions. She is a proud member of the Indian Prosthodontic Society and is based in Thane, Maharashtra. Known for her commitment to clinical excellence and patient-centered care, Dr. Deepika Ma'am has made significant contributions to the field of prosthodontics through her dedication to advanced treatment approaches and continuous professional development. So, without any further delay, I will just hand over the session over to you, ma'am. You may proceed with your talk.
Hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am, you're
Yes.
audible.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. So I'll share the presentation and we'll start in a bit. Okay. Is the screen visible?
Yes, ma'am, your screen is visible. You have to just do it on a full screen. Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so as we all know, and as ma'am has already introduced, the topic for today's presentation would be fundamentals of tooth preparation. So we'll stick to entirely just the basics of tooth preparation without going into much complexities of it to make the topic easier for the fresh graduates. Okay, so as we all know, what is a tooth preparation? Tooth preparation basically is removal or shaping of a tooth by removing healthy or diseased enamel, dentine, and cementum to shape a tooth in order to receive a crown. So basically, just shaping of a tooth in order to receive a crown is called as tooth preparation. So crown is what? Crown is a replacement of the missing tooth structure by partial or all of the remaining tooth structure with a material such as cast metal, porcelain, or a combination of material. Okay, so a crown is basically an artificial replacement of the missing tooth structure. So either it could be of metal, the crown could be of metal ceramic, the crown could be emax, the crown could be zirconia. There are n number of materials. Okay, so how before proceeding for crown preparation or before we start prepping a tooth to receive a crown, we need to decide what material we are going to be giving the patient or which material crown we are going to be giving, because according to the material selected, the entire tooth preparation is decided. Say the margin placement is decided according to the material, type of margin is decided according to the material. Also, the amount of occlusal reduction required is decided according to the material. Okay, so we need to decide the restorative material beforehand. Okay, so how do we select a restorative material? So most of us usually select a restorative material depending only on the patient factors, that is what the patient is able to afford or what the patient wants. Okay. But that is not the only factor to consider. There are many other factors that need to be considered. So apart from the patient's expectations, patient's financial needs, we need to check the biological factors. We need to check for mechanical factors, and we need to check for aesthetic requirements. Okay. So what are the biological factors? Biological factors, we need to see, well, how is the periodontal state of the tooth? Where is the bone level? We need to make x-rays. We need to check the periodontal health, the level of the bone. We need to check the pulpal health, if it would require a root canal in future, or if we are doing vital preparations, we need to see if we give a certain type of a crown, whether that crown will go for a intentional root canal. Because if we give a PFM crown, okay, and the pulp horns are too high, that is, we are doing a vital prep for, say, a younger patient. So in which cases the pulp horn is relatively higher. Doing a tooth preparation for, say, a PFM crown, the patient may land up into severe sensitivity, and we may have to go in for a root canal. So in those cases, we can recommend other conservative materials like Emax or zirconia or other types of crown material. So we need to check the pulpal health, the height of the pulpal horns. We need to check the occlusion. Say, where is the tooth present? Say, if the tooth is, we are restoring a molar, or if we are restoring an anterior. In both conditions, the requirements vary. So for posteriors, we require more of strength. So we'll choose a material depending on the strength of the material. For anteriors, we require more of aesthetic. So we'll choose a material which is more aesthetic. So we need to check where is the position of the tooth, what are the occlusal conditions, say if the tooth is under heavy load, or if the tooth is structurally compromised, but it is going to be subjected to heavy load. So we need to accordingly choose a material. Okay, so again, patient factors, biological factors, and third is the mechanical factor. What is a mechanical factor? Basically, we need to see what is the amount of remaining tooth structure, whether it is grossly decayed or there is healthy enamel present. Say if it is grossly decayed, we need to choose a material according to the remaining tooth structure. If there is good healthy enamel, we can achieve good bonding, then we can go in for bonded restorations like Emax. Or if say the height of the crown is only 3 to 4 mm, and we suggest doing a PFM crown. So the remaining tooth structure will be barely 2 mm, which is not sufficient for us to retain a crown, right? So in those cases, we may go for materials that require less amount of tooth reduction. So we need to weigh all these factors, and then we can propose the best type of crown that is suitable for the particular patient. Then we need to also check the height and width of the tooth to be prepared. As I said, if the height is already compromised and we furthermore prepare it for a PFM, then it may not be the best of the situations. We may have to go for other options like zirconia or Emax, and we need to check the attachment levels of the tooth to be prepared. Basically, we check the periodontal status. Last is your aesthetic factors. If the aesthetic requirements are high, or if it is clearly visible in the patient's smile line, then we need to go for more aesthetic materials like Emax. Okay, so basically we need to, while selecting a crown material, we need to weigh our options and select like by balancing between conservation of the tooth structure, as well as giving good aesthetics and a durable and a strong restoration. So we need to achieve that balance. Okay, so once we have selected our restorative material, then according to the material, we will be placing the margins. What type of margin, where will be the location of the margin, all those will depend on. So before starting a tooth preparation, we need to be clear where will be the margin, what type will be the margin. Okay, and how much amount of occlusal reduction and how much amount of axial reduction is required. So all this will depend on the material that you have chosen. Okay. So just to make things clear, we can run through this flow chart. Say how do you exactly select a material? So depending on the position, if it's an anterior or if it's a posterior tooth, okay. If it's an anterior, obviously you need to go for more aesthetic materials like Emax or layered zirconia, or maybe phi yttrium zirconia. So a lot of aesthetic materials are there. And even if we are choosing to give a PFM crown, so we need to choose, we need to see the remaining tooth structure, if it is discolored or no. Or say if I have to give a PFM, then I'll make sure that the margin is not visible. So lot of things. So if it's a posterior tooth, I need a material which will withstand the heavy occlusal loads. So we choose a material that will withstand that kind of load. Okay, second is design. If it's a single crown or if it is a multiple unit bridge. For materials like Emax, if it's a posterior tooth, Emax is not suggested to be, it's not recommended to give a Emax crown or a Emax bridge beyond your beyond your second premolars. Okay. So if it is a multiple unit bridge, so obviously you can't give a Emax, so you can go for other options like zirconia or maybe a PFM. So again, depending on the number of units, you can decide which material is to be chosen. Okay, then depending on the strength, whether the strength requirement is low, medium, or high. Then according to the substrate as in what is the remaining tooth structure mainly composed of. If you have good healthy enamel, that means you can nicely bond to that enamel. So you can choose materials like Emax. Or if a lot of dentine is exposed, so that means the uh, bonding could be compromised. So you can go for other materials which have more strength, like zirconia. So if it is a discolored tooth, and if you choose a translucent material like Emax, then you may not get the perfect shade match, or you may have that grayish, discoloration which is shown through the crown. So you will select other opaque materials like layered ceramics or layered zirconias. Okay. Last is your translucency, whether the translucency required is low, high. So depending on that, you need to consider all these factors, and then you can decide which material are we choosing for a particular crown. Okay. So for tooth preparation, our first consideration is finish line. So what is a finish line? It's basically peripheral extension of the tooth preparation. So the peripheral extensions of the tooth preparation is called as a finish line, and the crown, when the lab fabricates a crown, the crowns have a margin. Your tooth doesn't have a margin. Your tooth has a finish line. So there are two different terminologies. For a tooth, it is a finish line, and for a crown, it is a margin. Okay. So there are different types of finish line as well as different locations of the finish line. So finish lines are broadly classified into they are broadly classified based on two things. One is the location and other is the geometry of the finish line. So now depending on the location, finish line could be subgingival, supragingival, or equigingival, which we all have heard about. Okay. And depending on the geometry, the finish line could be chamfer, heavy chamfer, shoulder, radial shoulder, shoulder with bevel, and knife edge. So if you can see, the first image shows a shoulder finish line which has a 90-degree butt joint. Then comes the chamfer finish line which makes an obtuse angle, not a 90-degree angle. The third one shows a radial shoulder. Radial shoulder is again a 90-degree shoulder with a rounded internal angle. So this angle is rounded. and hence it is called as a radial shoulder. Shoulder with a bevel is rarely used, so I wouldn't be talking much about it. And last is your feather edge or a knife edge preparation. Okay, so these are the forms depending on the geometry. So again, one more illustration. The first image is your chamfer. Okay. Second is your knife edge. Third is your shoulder. And the last one is shoulder with a bevel. Okay. So now we'll talk in detail about finish lines according to their location. Supragingival finish line. So as the name suggests, it is a okay. So as the name suggests, it is a margin which is given supragingivally. It is above the gingival margin. Okay. What are the features? So basically it is one of the best type of margins, and so it does not violate the gingival complex, especially in the areas where there is inadequate zone of attached gingiva. Then because it is given supragingival or it is above the gingiva, there is ease of instrumentation, and since there is no bleeding, you are not touching the gingiva, so the visibility is not hampered. So that again is one of the advantages, that is ease of instrumentation and ease of preparation. Okay. And since there will be no bleeding, so obviously you can immediately go in for your impression. So impression procedures pose no problem if there is a supragingival margin. Okay. So as I already mentioned, the advantages of this type of gingival margin would be easier to prepare.
Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am. You got stuck. Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am. You got stuck. Hello, ma'am.
Sorry for the break.
No
Uh,
problem.
can I continue?
Yes, yes, ma'am. You can continue.
Okay. Okay. Sit. Okay. So where were we? Yeah, supragingival finish line. Okay, so what are the advantages? As I said, it is easier to prepare and it is easier to maintain by the patient. It is easy to record impressions and there is no delay in making impressions. It is easy to maintain by the patient. It is easy to keep clean and it is obviously situated in hard enamel since we are not involving much of the tooth structure. And it is easy for your evaluation on a recall. Okay. So these are the advantages. Ease of evaluation, as in when you try and check with a probe if there is any catch or is there any open margin. These type of finish lines, they can be evaluated very easily.
Ma'am, just a thing, your PPT is not in a full screen. Just do it on a full screen.
Sorry.
Your PPT is not showing as in full screen.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Now, yes, now it's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so what are the indications of a supragingival finish line? So since it is placed above the gingiva, it is used for non-aesthetic areas or in cases which have a low smile line. With people with high smile line, we may have to choose for other types of finish lines. And for your partially bonded restorations where you require margins to be placed in enamel, this is the type of finish line that you have to be selecting. And for patients with high caries susceptibility, so if it's a high caries index patient, it is better to give us supragingival because as I mentioned, it is easy to maintain by the patient and it is easy for the operator to check on your recall whether there are any secondary caries or is there any open margin or no. Okay, so these are the indications for a supragingival finish line. Then second is your equigingival finish line. So as the name suggests, it is at the level of the gingiva. It is one of the best type of margins, okay, which has features from, which has advantages from both the supra as well as the, I mean, it has the advantages of a supragingival finish line as well. So what are the advantages of a equigingival? Again, it is easy to make impressions, and secondly, it does not violate your gingival complex, and there is least amount of inflammation because of the presence of keratinized tissue. Okay. So your disadvantages with this type of margin would be, again, if it is a high aesthetic requirement case, you may not be able to use this type of a margin, especially say in your anterior region and the patient has a high smile line plus the tooth is discolored and you are giving a equigingival margin, you may have this type of an issue where the blackish discoloration will be seen at the margin. So in such cases, you may have to select subgingival finish line. Okay. So indications again, non-aesthetic or posterior areas, and usually equigingival or supragingival margins are given on the palatal or the lingual surface of your crowns, say of lingual surfaces of your teeth. Okay. Last one is your subgingival. So this is the type of finish line which you should be avoiding, but still it is used in a lot of cases. Like I would suggest that you avoid this type of a margin because there are a lot of disadvantages associated with this type of a margin. So as I said, it is best avoided unless really indicated. And if at all you are placing a subgingival margin, then it should be placed at least 2 mm away from the alveolar crest, so you don't violate the gingival complex or you don't violate the biologic width. So what are the disadvantages of a subgingival finish line? One is since it is situated below the gingiva, so obviously there'll be a lot of bleeding while prepping a tooth. So you can't make impressions. So there'll always be delayed impression. You can't make impressions on the same day. Secondly, there is always a risk of violating the biological width. Then there could be since there is less visibility and a lot of bleeding, you may not be able to assess your preparation well. So there is no ease of preparation. There could be defective margin placement. And because it's subgingival, there is plaque retention. Then during your recalls or during your, I would say, during your disc trials or during your metal trials, it is difficult to assess the fit of the crown or the restoration. And still, there are a lot of indications for this type of a margin. I'll name the indications. One is your high aesthetic required area, highly aesthetic areas. You need to prepare a subgingival margin. Then if there is subgingival caries, if there is any kind of abrasion, abfraction or erosion cavity, or if there is any type of dentinal hypersensitivity, so you need to cover that sensitive area, cover it with a crown. You can't leave it exposed. So in order to cover it completely, you have to go beyond the defect. Correct. Also, this type of a finish line is needed if you need to gain more crown length. So you have to extend it apically. Also, if there is any type of a rotated or a tilted tooth, then to make it straight or to achieve more favorable contour for the crown, you need to go subgingival. Okay, so these are the indications for your subgingival finish line. So for the subgingival finish line, there's this study which suggests that if the margins were at least 0.4 mm occlusal to the base of the gingival crevice, it gave the best result. So if you're giving a subgingival margin, then it's best that it is at least 0.4 mm occlusal to the base of your gingival crevice. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So now we'll come to the different types of finish lines according to their design or geometry. So first we'll look into chamfer. Okay, what is a chamfer finish line? A finish line designed for tooth preparation in which the gingival aspect or say the gingival aspect makes the obtuse angle with the tooth structure or the remaining tooth structure or the axial wall. Okay. If you can see in this picture, this is the angle. Sorry. Yeah. So the axial wall makes an angle of more than 90 degree with the cervical area. Okay. So what are the advantages of a chamfer finish line? One is it is a distinct margin. It provides adequate bulk and it is a fairly easier margin to prepare. Disadvantages, I'll show you in the next slide. First, I'll tell you how do you prepare a chamfer finish line. So a chamfer finish line, either you can use a round tapered burr with a rounded end, or you can use a torpedo shape burr. There are burrs which are called as torpedo shape. Either you use a tapered burr with a rounded tip. Okay. So when you sink this burr to half of its width, you will get a chamfer finish line. Or if you use a torpedo shape, then you need to sink in completely. To see, if you're using a torpedo, then you just sink in to the tip till the time this tip is entirely into the tooth structure, and you will get a obtuse angle like this. I hope I'm clear. Or if you are using a tapered burr with a round end, then you sink in to half of its width. Okay. What are the indications of a chamfer finish line? You use it for your metal crowns. If you are giving a metal crown, then this is the type of margin that you should be preparing. Or if you are giving a PFM crown, then on the lingual side, we usually have a metal margin. So for your lingual surfaces, you can give a chamfer finish line, and the rest of the tooth will have another type of finish line. Okay. So hope I'm clear. A chamfer is a finish line that makes an obtuse angle with your KO surface. So when you prepare a chamfer finish line, you need to make sure that you don't create this unsupported lip of enamel. If you can see in this image, if you sink the burr completely into the tooth, then you may have this type of a lip, unsupported enamel, which will cause. So say you have prepared and you have formed a enamel lip like this, and when you make an impression, and when the impression is sent to the lab, they'll pour a cast, and while they pour a cast and retrieve the cast, this lip will be broken on the cast, which will inadvertently get broken while the technician is trying to make a wax pattern or maybe trying to retrieve the cast, and the technician will form a crown for you. But this lip is still present in the patient's mouth. And when you try to fit that restoration in the patient's mouth, this lip is going to interfere with the seating of the restoration, and you'll never have good fitting crowns. So that is why when you are making a chamfer margin, you have to make sure that you don't form this unsupported lip of enamel. And if you have formed, then you need to check it with a probe. And if there is any formation of this lip, you need to make sure that you remove that lip before making an impression. Recommended chamfer finish line is usually 0.3 to 0.5 mm. So when you sink the burr to half of it, the burr is usually 1 mm. The thickness of the burr is usually 1 mm. You can buy a tapered burr with 1 mm thickness. Once you sink it to half of its thickness, you will get a 0.5 mm of chamfer margin. Okay. So we have another type of finish line, which is a heavy chamfer. So heavy chamfer is same as the chamfer, but it has an rounded internal angle. It has a rounded internal angle. Also, the angle it forms a 90-degree KO surface angle and an internal rounded angle. Okay. So chamfer is with an obtuse angle, and a heavy chamfer is with a 90-degree angle. So what are the advantages? It provides more space or more bulk for the material. It is a better support for a ceramic crown. But the disadvantage, as I said, if the operator is unskilled, then you may end up preparing a finish line with an unsupported lip of enamel. Okay, so that is one of the disadvantages. Indications are for your all type of PFM crowns. you can use this type of a margin. Again, the burr used for this type of a margin is round, your tapered burr with a rounded end. So this, if you can see the difference between chamfer and your heavy chamfer. Chamfer is just 0.5 mm of a margin with obtuse angle, and heavy chamfer is almost a 90-degree angle with an internal rounded angle. Okay. So your chamfer is used for metal crowns, and heavy chamfer can be used for porcelain fused to metal. That is for your PFM crowns. Third is your shoulder finish line. Shoulder is a type of margin which forms a 90-degree angle with the unprepared tooth surface. Okay, because it makes a 90-degree as it makes a 90-degree angle, this sharp angle is where the stresses are concentrated. So that is one of the disadvantages of shoulder margin, that is stress concentration on the internal side. Okay, so but it is a most preferred type of margin for your PFMs, since it provides bulk for the restoration, bulk for your metal as well as for your ceramic layering. The disadvantages, as I said, it is less conservative and there is stress concentration at the 90-degree angle. Okay. So that is one of the major disadvantages, that it creates stress concentration at these sharp lines. Okay. Indications are for all your PFMs, this type of a margin is used and even for your all ceramic crowns, a shoulder margin can be given for your all ceramic crowns and for your PFMs. For your PFM, if you're giving a chamfer on the lingual side, then rest of the margins will be shoulder. The type of burr that is used for making shoulder margin is tapered with flat end. Tapered with a flat end. Okay, so to overcome the disadvantage of this type of a margin, which is stress concentration on the internal angles, there is another margin which is called as radial shoulder. So radial shoulder is a shoulder with rounded internal angle, So we can overcome the disadvantage that is the stress concentration. So it is basically a modification of the shoulder finish line. Advantage, as I said, there is no stress concentration. So it is best suited for your all ceramic crowns, since all ceramic crowns tend to fracture because of stress concentration. And it is less conservative since you submerge the entire tip of the burr. So it is the shoulder and radial shoulder margins are approximately 1 to 1.2 mm of margin. So it is not as conservative as a chamfer. Okay. So again, a radial shoulder can be used for your all ceramic crowns and as well as for your PFM crowns. Last one is the knife edge. It is one of the least used margin, but there are still many clinical scenarios where you may need a knife edge margin. So what is a knife edge margin? It is basically when you remove all the coronal convexity. Say this, if this is the convexity, when we remove all the convexities of the tooth, what we will be left with is a knife edge margin. So it is barely visible or a barely seen kind of a margin, but still it is one of the margins. So when you remove all the coronal convexities, you get a knife edge margin. Advantages, it is an acute margin for metal. Obviously, there's a lot of conservation of the tooth structure since you're not removing much, you are just removing the convexities which are coronal to the margin, and ease of preparation. Disadvantages, since there is no clear margin it is difficult for the lab technician to delineate the margin and to make a wax pattern. Second is because of the thin margins, the wax patterns will distort while removing and while placing it back. And because of those thin margins, the wax pattern tend to distort. There is a possibility that the technician will over contour the restoration if you have not given a proper margin. Then difficult to locate on a die, as I mentioned, and it does not provide sufficient bulk of the material at the margin. So there are a lot of disadvantages with this type of a margin, but still in a lot of clinical scenarios, we need to give a knife edge margins. Now, what could be the indications? One is, say, many a times the lower or the mandibular molars are lingually tilted. So if it is a heavily lingually tilted mandibular molar and you tend to straighten it, you will end up losing a lot of tooth structure. So in those cases, you just remove the convexities coronally and you make a knife edge in cases of molars which are heavily tilted towards the lingual, or with teeth which are very convex in shape, or say if it is a tilted tooth or a rotated tooth. So the side which is tilted or the side which is from where you need to correct the rotation, you can place a knife edge margin, because any other type of margin would be not at all conservative and you may end up losing a lot of healthy tooth structure. Third is when you have attempted for any kind of root amputation and the margin is to be placed on cementum, you will use a knife edge margin. And in younger patients where you have less tooth structure remaining, or you have to give crowns for your pedo patients, then in those cases we use a knife edge margin. Or in cases where you have highly inaccessible areas like the distal surfaces of your upper sevens or your upper eights, you can use a knife edge margin. Okay, so hope we are clear with the type of margins. Now we'll move to the principles of tooth preparation. Okay, so principles of tooth preparation. What are the basic principles? One is preservation of your tooth structure, your retention and resistance form, structural durability, marginal integrity, and last is your preservation of the periodontium. We'll look into all these factors individually. First, we'll look into preservation of your tooth structure. So, how do you conserve a tooth structure? One is go for partial restorations as far as possible and not your full crowns. Second is minimal taper. You need not excessively taper your tooth preparations. Then most of us, while doing occlusal reductions, we just chop off the occlusal surface. In such cases, we end up losing so much of a healthy tooth structure. If you can see in this image. So planar occlusal reduction is one way to preserve your tooth structure. So we need not chop off the entire occlusal surface, rather follow the anatomy and do a planar occlusal reduction. Okay, then even occlusal reductions. So if you can see in this image, one axial surface is prepared less and the other one is excessively prepared. So you end up losing so much of a healthy tooth structure. So even axial reduction is one way of conserving your tooth structure. So see in this image also, if you can see, the molar has been excessively prepared and over tapered. Premolar looks okay. So even reduction, you have to do even reduction on all your axial surfaces. And selection of a conservative margin. Say if you're giving a PFM crown which is not conservative, so and there is less healthy tooth structure remaining, so you may go for other type of restorations which will conserve the tooth structure. And last one is unnecessary apical extension of the preparation. So the more apical you extend your preparation, the more you go subgingival or below the gingiva, you will have to over taper the preparation, because if you don't over taper it, you will end up having an undercut. So to achieve a preparation without undercuts, you will have to over taper it. So as much as possible, stay above the gingiva, and so you can achieve parallelism, like not exactly parallel, but you will have minimum taper to the preparation, and in turn you will conserve the tooth structure. So these are the factors for conservation of your tooth structure. One is planar occlusal reduction. Do partial crowns instead of full crowns. Avoid unnecessary apical extension. Do even reduction on all your sides. Okay. Then comes your retention and resistance form. So what is retention? We all know it is a feature of the tooth preparation that resists dislodgement along the path of insertion. So this image shows retention form. Any feature which will resist the displacement of the crown in the same direction as of your placement. And resistance is the feature which enhances the stability of a restoration, and it will resist the displacement of the restoration in any other path other than the path of insertion. So it will resist the displacement in, say, oblique or horizontal direction. Okay, so clinically, retention and resistance, they both go hand in hand. These are not features which are separate. Like there is no specific feature that will give you retention form, and there is no feature that will give you resistance form. They are intermingled. Okay. So any resistance in apical, oblique, or horizontal direction is called as your resistance form. In practice, retention and resistance are closely related, and they are not always clearly distinguishable. Factors affecting retention and resistance are your total occlusal convergence, that is your taper, then your freedom of displacement, length, that is your occlusocervical to your faciolingual, the ratio of occlusocervical to the faciolingual. Then fourth is your substitution of internal features, and last is path of insertion. So taper or total occlusal convergence. What is a taper? Before seeing what is a taper, we need to understand a few terms. One is inclination. Okay, inclination is, if you see this image, inclination is relationship of one wall of the preparation to the long axis of the tooth. Relationship of one wall to the long axis. So basically, if you can see, this has a inclination of 3 degrees. So why inclination? We need to know about inclination is your regular tapered burrs. They have an inclination of 3 degrees, 2 to 3 degrees. What that means is when you hold the tapered burr straight without any tilt, it will give you an inclination of 3 degrees on your preparation. So your tapered burrs have 2 to 3 degrees of inclination. Now, what is total occlusal convergence? The angle of convergence between the two opposing axial surfaces. Okay, so when these two walls will converge, they will make an angle which is called as total occlusal convergence. So one wall is 3 degree inclined, another is 3 degree inclined. When they both converge, they will make a angle of 6 degree. So this 6 degree is your taper. Okay, so when you have an inclination of 3 degree on each axial surfaces, you will have a taper of 6 degree. But to achieve a taper of 6 degree, which is more or less as good as parallel walls, To achieve a 6-degree taper is not easy clinically because the patient sometimes doesn't have enough mouth opening, or when you prepare the upper sevens, you can't go in straight. You have to tilt your handpiece, or some amount of like holding the handpiece absolutely straight is not possible. So clinically, your ideal taper is 6-degree, but clinically achievable taper is 10 to 22 degrees. 10 to 22 degrees is the taper which is easily, it can be achieved, as well as is a clinically acceptable taper. Anything beyond 10 to 20 degrees is something which will be called as over tapered, or which will require additional internal features to aid in retention. Okay, so I hope I'm clear. The ideal taper is 6-degree. Clinically acceptable taper is 10 to 20 degrees. Anything beyond 20 degree will require additional internal features. So as what is an as there is angle of conversion, say instead of converging, one wall diverges out. Okay, if one of the walls diverges out, so this angle of diversion will create an undercut. An undercut is defined as a divergence between opposing axial walls or a wall segment in a cervico-occlusal direction. So if one of the walls is diverging out, this will be the area where an undercut will be formed. Okay. So by logic, we all know more the taper, less will be the retention. Okay, so we have to make sure that we achieve minimal taper on our preparations. Then second comes the freedom of displacement. So if you have more number of path of removal, say your restoration comes out in multiple pathways, so it has less retention. And if it has only single path of insertion and removal, it is a highly retentive restoration. So retention is improved by limiting the number of paths along which a restoration can be removed from the tooth preparation. Maximum retention is achieved when there is only one path of insertion and removal. So if you have a excessively tapered tooth preparation, your restoration will come out in multiple directions. And if you have almost parallel axial walls, your restoration will go in a particular direction, and it will come out in that direction only. So your taper is important, and you have to check the taper formed. Okay. Then comes your length. If you have an excessively tapered tooth preparation, so the length becomes more important. Say if you have a short crown and you have excessively tapered it, it will lose all its retention and resistance properties. Okay, so decreasing the length of a tapered preparation causes a disproportionate decrease in the resisting area. A crown with a relatively long axial wall can resist a strong tipping force. Obviously, if you have long preparations, you will have more resistance form because it will not let the restoration tip off from the occlusal surface. Okay. So for your premolars and for your anterior teeth, 3 mm is the minimal required occlusal cervical dimension. That is minimum required length for your premolars and anterior teeth to have good retention and resistance is 3 mm. And for your molars, 4 mm is the required length. For your molars, 4 mm is the minimal length that you should have in order to achieve a good retention and resistance form. Okay. Ratio would be 0.4 or higher. So if you divide your occlusocervical length to the facio-lingual width, you should get a figure of 0.4 or higher to achieve good retention and resistance form. Also, we are talking about cases where you have ideal taper. So if you have ideal taper for your, this is necessary to decide how much tooth structure, how much occlusal reduction you need. And after doing that much of occlusal reduction, what will be the length of the tooth that will be left? Say if you have 4 mm of crown length on a posterior tooth, and you are planning a PFM where you will chop off 2 mm of it, what you will be left is only 2 mm of the remaining tooth structure, which is highly inadequate in order to achieve any kind of retention and resistance. So then you have to think of other factors like taking the margin subgingivally or doing any kind of crown lengthening procedure. But somehow you need to achieve 4 mm of crown length. Okay, so that is about retention and resistance form. Then comes your length. As I said, longer preparations will have more retention. So how do you check for that? So the length should be enough to interfere with an arc. So say if I make a arc from the opposite side of the, from the opposite wall. Say if I make an arc from this point, this arc should resist the displacement. Length should be enough to interfere with the arc of displacement, pivoting around a point on the margin on opposite side of the restoration. So if you draw an arc, say now for this, I draw an arc from here, and this length, it's intersecting and it will resist the displacement. But for a shorter crown, this arc is not intercepted anywhere. So it will have no retention and resistance form. For your shorter preparations, your taper is of critical importance. So for your shorter preparations, you need to have more of parallel walls and less of taper. Surface area, we all know, for your, if you have larger surface area, it will be more retentive. So molars are more retentive than your premolar crowns. Then last comes your path of insertion. So path of insertion, we need to take into consideration both ways. One is facio-lingually, other is mesiodistally. Okay. So say in this image, you can see A is your ideal path of insertion. Okay. Facio-lingually, where there is enough preparation on the buccal side and the crown goes in to the, goes in a direction which is along the path of along the long axis of your tooth. Okay, so if in case I have inadequate reduction, as you can see in this image, if there is inadequate reduction on the buccal side or there is any sharp edge, then the path of insertion changes. Now it is inclined more facially. Instead of along the path of along the long axis, now the crown goes in from a more facial direction. Okay, so this will affect the aesthetics, and this crown may not fit well. Okay, third is if you achieve a more lingual path of insertion, that means you have over reduced the entire buccal side. Okay, so the path of insertion has to be along the long axis in order to achieve a proper tooth preparation, which is neither under-prepared, neither over-prepared. Okay, so say now, say if we had a situation like B, so there'll be less space for the porcelain layering in this type of scenario. And since there'll be less layering of porcelain, your aesthetics will be compromised. Or if you are using a all ceramic crown, then this area will lead to stress concentration. Okay, now After faciolingually, then you have to check mesiodistally. The mesiodistal inclination of the path must parallel the contact areas of your adjacent teeth. Okay, it should be parallel to your contact areas of your adjacent teeth. So if the path is inclined mesially or distally, say if the restoration doesn't go in straight, it goes in either mesially or from the distal direction, then what will happen? The restoration will fit only to the half length and then it will stay locked out. Okay. If the path is inclined mesially or distally, the restoration will be held up at the proximal contact area and will be locked out. Okay. So what happens is when the technician will fabricate this on a cast while removing the wax pattern, while putting it back, or maybe while removing the coping and putting the coping back, a lot of times this slight area which is not parallel, say one second. Yeah, this area, this gets abraded on the cast. So on the cast, it fits in, but when you try it in the mouth, it will just go in half its length and stay locked out. So you have to, in order to make sure that it goes in straight, you have to reshape this abutment with slight enameloplasty and make sure that both these contact areas are parallel, and then you make an impression. Okay, so this is about your path of insertion. Stress concentration. If the line angle between the axial and the occlusal surface is sharp, it leads to concentration of stresses around that junction, and induced stresses. If these stresses exceed the strength of the cement, it leads to cohesive failure of the cement. So what this means is, while you prepare your occlusal and your axial surfaces, say your angles where the occlusal surface meets the axial surface, it remains sharp. So the junction between your occlusal and the axial surface, if it remains sharp, that is where the stresses are concentrated. And when, say, you must have noticed clinically what usually happens is when there is a crown which is dislodged, you will see there is all the cement that was used is stuck to the crown and there is nothing remaining on the tooth structure. So why this happens is because there is the failure is always at the tooth and the cement junction. The failure is never at the junction of the crown and the cement. Okay. Failure is always at the junction of the tooth and the cement. Why? Because of these sharp angles. Because of these sharp angles, the cement, the tooth debonds from the cement and the entire cement comes out with the crown. So how do you negate this? You have to round off the internal line angle. So all the line angles have to be rounded off in order to reduce the stresses and thus aid in retention and resistance. Okay, so now if there are cases where there is less length or there is over taper, or there are cases where the retention and resistance is compromised, so you need to give secondary retentive features like grooves and boxes. We all pinholes we rarely, nobody uses these days, but we can still use grooves and boxes to aid in retention. So in case of highly tapered restorations, or in cases of your tooth with less length, you can give grooves on the proximal surfaces. Okay. Surface roughness. Retention increases when the restoration is roughened or grooved. So you should always have a restoration which has rough surfaces and the tooth should be polished. And that restoration has to be air abraded, or you can roughen it with your, if it's a PFM, you can roughen the metal side of it with your burr. Or if you are giving an Emax or a zirconia, then you make sure that the lab, either you air abraded, or the lab air abrades and sends it to you, because that will aid in the retention and resistance. Okay. And failure rarely occurs at the cement tooth surface. So roughening of the tooth preparation hardly influences retention. Last is your structural durability. Structural durability is a restoration must contain a bulk of material that is adequate to withstand the force of occlusion. So to get good structural durability, you need to do proper occlusal reduction. You need to provide functional cusp bevel and proper axial reduction. Okay. Occlusal reduction, that is, you need to reduce according to the type of material that you have selected. In case of metal, you need to reduce the occlusal surface by 1.5 mm on the functional cusp side and 1 mm on the non-functional side. If you are using a PFM, then your reduction is 2 mm on the functional cusp and 1.5 mm on the non-functional cusp. If you are using all ceramic, then 1.5 mm of clearance is needed throughout. And you need to have planar occlusal reductions, as I have shown earlier. Then most important is your functional cusp bevel. As the name suggests, it's a bevel that is given on the functional cusp of a tooth. Now, which are the functional cusp? For your mandibular molars, it is your buccal cusp, and for your maxillary, it is your palatal or the lingual cusp. So any bevel which is given on the functional cusp is called as the functional cusp bevel. You can see in this image. Okay. So what will happen in scenarios where we don't give a functional cusp bevel? So if you can see in this image, we have given a functional cusp bevel, and because of this bevel, we have good space for the restorative material in this area. So as we all know, functional cusp require more strength, because these are the areas where more stress is going to be induced on the tooth. So we require more bulk of the restoration in these areas. So if we don't give a functional cusp bevel, you can see there will be hardly any space for the restorative material. So either you will have thin crowns, which will fracture or perforate, or you will say if the lab decides to give you a proper thickness crown, okay, a crown with good restorative material, then you will have high point in the patient's mouth, because this has been added, but there is not much clearance that is present in this area. So in what will you do? You will end up trimming the high point, and again you will have a thin crown. Okay. So now if the lab sends you the work back saying that there is less clearance, what will you do? Instead of giving a functional cusp bevel, you will trim the entire surface, and you will lose so much of healthy tooth structure that could be preserved just by giving a functional cusp bevel. So this solves your purpose of giving good strength as well as providing space for your restorative material. Your axial reductions, as I said, you should have adequate and proper reduction of your axial surfaces. So if you have less reduction of your axial surfaces, two things could be possible. One is the lab will give you thin margins, or the lab will give you an over contoured crown. Both these scenarios are not favorable. Okay? Inadequate axial reduction can cause thin walls, and thin walls will cause a weak restoration, which when subjected to occlusal forces will distort. Or the lab can give you a over contoured restoration, which will strengthen the crown but will have a disastrous effect on the periodontium, because this will lead to food lodgement and all periodontal issues. So this is just a summary of what we spoke till now. You all can go through this. Yeah. Yeah. So that's about the lecture today. If you all have any queries, we can answer those queries.
So much, ma'am. Thank you so much for your valuable insights, and it was a really informative talk. And this was a wonderful session, ma'am. Thank you so much once again. So with this, I will just move forward to our question answer part. We have received few questions from our participating doctors. So I will just read out those questions, and you can give answer.
Sure.
Just a second, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So I am just reading out those questions. So the first question, ma'am, you can stop sharing your screen now.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first question is from Ananya Sharma, who is a final year BDS student from Jaipur, Rajasthan. So what are the fundamental principles that should guide every tooth preparation procedure?
Yeah, as I said, preservation of your tooth structure. You have to be conservative. You have to make sure you have a ideal taper, that is your retention and resistance form. Then you have to make sure you have good structural durability, that is proper axial reduction. And then your like these are the major factors that you need to consider. And your marginal integrity.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So the next question is from Dr. Rohan Patel, who is a dental intern from Ahmedabad, Gujarat. So how can clinicians achieve adequate tooth reduction while preserving as much healthy tooth structure as possible?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, you need to decide your restorative material depending on a lot of factors. Like you need to see what is the remaining tooth structure. Say the tooth structure remaining has a height of 4 mm, then you need to select a material which is more conservative. Or if you select something which is not as conservative, then you have to make sure that you use other principles, like you may use a subgingival finish line. Okay, so you have to strike a balance between things. And always, as I said, if you go for partial restorations, or if you try and conserve as much as tooth that is possible, you can use materials like all ceramic, or you don't go for materials like PFM, which require more reduction. So uh, before starting to prep, you decide what will be the tooth structure left in case of any material that you are choosing. So this is how you will decide. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So the third question is from Dr. Meera Joseph, who is a dental intern from Kochi, Kerala. So how should the choice of finish line vary depending on the restorative material being used?
Okay. So as I said, every case has a different requirement. Okay. So if you are giving a Emax crown, you need more of enamel, right? So you will prefer a supragingival margin. Or if you have good length or a good tooth structure that is remaining, you can easily go for a supragingival margin. Say if you have a crown which is already less in height and you want to give a crown over it, so you need to achieve, as I mentioned, for a molar, we need minimum of 4 mm of length, and you have barely 3 mm. So you have to go for a subgingival margin. So with every case, again, I'm repeating the same thing. Before starting a preparation, you imagine what will be the tooth structure left according to the say if you're choosing a PFM, you need 4 mm, then after reduction, you will be left with 2 mm of the crown structure. So you have to plan for a crown lengthening procedure beforehand. So depending on the material, you will be choosing where will be your margin placed, supra, equi, or subgingival, but try and give a supragingival margin or an equigingival margin as far as possible. Only with cases where you need more length, then you can go in for a subgingival margin. Or if your case is say if you're doing an anterior tooth and it is a high smile line case, so you go for a subgingival margin. These are the cases you will use a subgingival margin for. Rest, most of the cases can be managed with your supra or an equigingival margin.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering this question. The next question is from Dr. Vivek Kumar, who is a general dentist from Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh. What are the most common tooth preparation errors that compromise the longevity of indirect restorations?
So mostly it is your taper. Most of us, especially with the posterior teeth, we tend to over taper the preparations, and in turn we lose the retention and resistance form. And second is undercut preparation. So when there are undercuts present, usually you have irregular tooth preparation, or there is no proper preparation of your axial surfaces. So in those cases also, the restorations may not have a good fitting of the at the marginal area. Okay, because a lab will tend to block the undercut, and he'll give you a loose fitting restoration in turn. So you'll not have good retention and resistance in that type of a crown also. So yes, taper and undercut are the most common errors.
Thank you, ma'am. The next question is from Dr. Sana Ali, junior dentist from Hyderabad, Telangana. So, how can clinicians improve retention and resistance from without excessive tooth reduction?
So most important is you keep the burr straight to the long axis of the tooth while you in the finger rest, and the direction of your handpiece is very important. You need to make sure that you hold the burr uh, as parallel to the long axis of the tooth as possible without tilting it in any direction. So if you keep the tapered burr straight, you will achieve an ideal taper. But for your posterior teeth, you may not be able to insert it at an exact 90-degree angle. So slight diversion is allowed, provided you get a taper between 10 to 22 degrees.
Thank you, ma'am. So, the last question is from Dr. Arjun Desai, who is a junior dentist from Surat, Gujarat. What practical tips can help dentists perform more accurate and predictable tooth preparations?
So one is, as I said, finger rest. If you take a proper finger rest from your opposing arch or from your adjacent arch, and you keep a stable hand, you will never over prepare the preparations. And secondly, you need to use good burrs. Okay, if your burrs are worn down, you may not end up having a good preparation because you will excessively apply the force, which is not required ideally. So having good burrs or your good equipments, and second is your finger rest and your hand stability is most important while achieving good preparations.
Thank you so much. That was all, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering each one of questions with such clarity. It will really help our all participating doctors and delegates